All right. My name is Corey Smith, and this is Horse Racing Tell Me How. Thanks again for everyone joining in. This is week 4 of the webinars. Pretty exciting that it's the last week of the webinars, but also a little bit sad that it's the last week of the webinars. So the series of 4 weeks has been pretty amazing. We've had people all around the world, and from something that started as a little idea with my mates has ended up being something that has attracted over 2,000 people, either watching the YouTube clips or coming on the webinar. So thank you for all of those participants. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. And hopefully today we have just as exciting webinar for you. So our guest today, we have Matt Cumani, the head trainer at Cumani Racing. So Matt's no stranger to the horse racing industry, son of the revered English Derby winner Luca Cumani. Matt boasts 10 years of varied experience all over the world with some of the world's top trainers. And now he is one of those himself. So getting results on the track, Matt, at the moment. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Once again, we have Troy Corstens on. So Troy's the head trainer at Malua Racing. And Troy, you were on the first webinar, and pretty amazing how it's grown since then, but welcome back.
Thanks, Corey. Good job by you, and nice to be on number 4 as well.
And finally, we have Mitchell Freedman. So Mitch, you were on last week, and we put you under the microscope with your understanding of the mounting yard and a few other topics, and we've got you back again now. So the fun part, going to the races. Welcome back again.
Thanks very much, Corey. Looking forward to it.
All right, so this week's brief was pretty simple. So we've done a lot of homework throughout. There's been a lot of hours put into the homework along the way by our participants, starting from pedigree, working through sales, large catalogs. But this week it's about trying to make the experience of going to the races, ownership, and understanding our trainers better. So for us out there that love horse racing and maybe don't have the knowledge, I believe, and I mean, first question I guess would be to Matt, the opportunities in Australia, just by the fact that during coronavirus the racing has still been going, how big has that been for this industry?
Well, from a personal point of view, it's been absolutely huge. I think the difference between racing going for us and it not going was the difference between my business operating much further than 4 weeks into the crisis. Because I think had it been shut down, I think a lot of the horses would have had to go out to the paddock, and we've got 27 staff on our books and a lot of them are full-time, and there's no way we could have carried on paying them. And I think the business would have collapsed. And instead we've, through real team effort by everyone involved in racing, we've managed to keep racing going. And we, from a personal experience, we've had amongst our best 2 months since we've been operating. So it's actually been a huge reversal of fortune. It could have been an absolute disaster for us, but instead we've been able to keep it going. And it's been hard, no doubt, for the owners, I'm sure, with not being able to go and see their horses winning. And we've had a big winner in the period, and a horse that was owned by a lot of people, a large group, and none of them were able to come to the race. And for some of them it was their first city win, and huge amount of prize money on offer, and they missed out on a great day out. So obviously gutting for them, but much better than missing out on it in the first place.
Which horse was that, Matt?
A horse called Quay Quay.
Ah, yeah, one of my mates from my soccer club is in that. So
right,
yeah, he's one of them. Yeah, so yeah, Chris Schumacher. Yeah, so he was loving life anyway, I think. So
there was a great video of him enjoying it he was in his pajamas, I think, enjoying it from his bedroom. But I think it's obviously great to get that win, but they missed out on a huge day out. But better to have the horse at the races and winning that sort of race than missing out altogether had racing been shut down.
Yeah, and Mitch, I guess with no crowd there, how has that changed the experience on race days for both? Obviously, no owners are allowed there, no race day goers are allowed there, but how's it changed for those of you in the industry that are at the track?
Obviously, yeah, just the basic things of not having that interaction with your owners and them getting to see their horses, and a little bit less atmosphere as well. Certainly noticed that probably Friday night meetings at the Valley, and some of the bigger metro meetings, you've noticed that atmosphere is gone. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's sort of been play on, and it's been a good opportunity for the industry to be, you know, on a number of free to air avenues, and you know, it's probably one positive you can take out of it all.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess with any, or it's a pandemic, so we've never had one of those in our lifetime, but any problem usually presents an opportunity. So Troy, something that I've really noticed with the horse racing industry right now is that even though it has still been going, there's a lot of change and a lot of opportunity to maybe bring in new initiatives and innovations going forward. So would you agree that right now is a perfect opportunity to try and take those, maybe take some opportunities in changing the way race day experiences are when crowds are allowed to come back?
Yeah, look, I don't think you can. There's no replacement for being there when you actually win a race. But I mean, 12 weeks ago, I didn't know what Zoom was, and I can tell you, I've done, probably 50 or 60 Zoom meetings. Whether that be, I watched a couple of races with an ownership group, and watched a good winner with an ownership group. So there's all things like that are going to change. But it's just fantastic that we've been able to keep going, to be honest. So.
Yeah.
I've got to say, I've taken the period and just changed things up a little bit. It's a real grind having to do what we do, and the other boys will attest to the same, that getting up at 3:30 in the morning and then working all morning and then going to the races all day, it's a really hard slog. And to be honest, like, I only ever watch the races on the television anyway, so I don't watch them live anymore. So you're basically at the races on race day to appease your owners and to interact with them. So since we haven't been able to do that, I've taken the time to not go as much, which has been fantastic, I can say.
Yeah, just on that, a lot of the homework surrounds with ideas of initiatives to try and bring more people to the races. Obviously, the Spring Carnival and all of the big cups, everything else brings huge crowds, but the average race day does have a small crowd, even when crowds are allowed to be there. A lot have been around making it, a lot of people have suggested making it free, or potentially things such as, we had one really good one here that I liked. Sorry, I'll just find it. So free entry, but or they pay an entry fee, which gives them potentially a little bit of a sweep, and they could win a prize. So when they pay their entry, they get a horse for the day. They follow that horse in the race. They may know nothing about the horse, or they may not be interested in betting, but they get that horse, and that gets them something to follow. And maybe they get a prize if that horse was to win. A little bit like the All-Star Mile concept, but on a much smaller country race day scale, where it just comes as a freebie at the gate. What do you think about that sort of idea?
It's a really good idea. It's just like anything, you need someone to start the initiative up, and probably someone like Troa, Thoroughbred Racehorse Owners Association, could possibly come up with something like that. And obviously RVL would need to back something like that, but it's a great idea. And I think any ideas, and the more people we can get to the races, the better, because during the week, basically just owners are going, really, and participants. So if we can establish that and get more people to the races, it'd be a great thing.
Yeah, and just back to Matt, there's always, I guess there's this perception in the horse racing industry, or on the outside of the horse racing industry looking in, that it is all about gambling and that type of thing. And a lot of obviously it's really important for that part of the sport to continue, because it brings a lot of wealth to the sport. But there is a perception that traditionally it's a sport for royals and celebrities, but we know that that's not the case right now. And I guess I would bring something up. The win of Sasko in Warrnambool, a lot of the media and a lot of the stories were around Sasko being a 26-1 winner, as opposed to the great run that it had and the great training effort. Would you think that maybe, how do you see that perception, and how do we change that perception to get the average people to come and watch the sport, like they go and watch their local footy team, like they go and watch their local soccer team, and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I think it's always a sort of polarized argument as to whether, who's more important, the punter or the owner or the general race goer. And I think that it's a pointless and silly argument. We should be trying to involve as many people as possible. And there's a place for everyone. And I think if we want to safeguard the industry for the future, what we really need to do is broaden the appeal. I think the punters will always come because it's a great sport to have a bet on, and so long as we keep looking after them, I think that sort of sector will look after itself. What we need to make sure is that we can increase the crowd numbers, people who are just there for a good day out, and also increase potential future participants, people who not only will own a horse, but also people who will want to come into the sport as a jockey, a trainer, a strapper, and of course an owner. And I think one of the things that what I'd really like to see more of is family days at the races. I think that if we can encourage parents to bring their kids and make it a family atmosphere, I think those kids seeing their parents enjoying the sport will always have good memories of it. I know that I started really enjoying the sport just by watching my parents enjoy it, and I enjoy Formula One racing when I don't really have any connection to motor cars, or I'm not a petrol head or anything like that, but I enjoy it because my old man loved it. And that's where we all get the things that we love doing. We get that love of things because our parents had it. And I think the best way to increase numbers and to get more people into the sport is by bringing them in at an early age with their parents and really enjoying it from that point on. And that'll help across the board, not only owners, but audience, but also people who will want to come into the sport. And that's, I think, really important. And, and then that'll split off into people who actually really enjoy the punt and take that as the most serious reason for why they go. And people who will just want to turn up just for a day out. I think another thing as a way to maybe diversify and change up the race day experience is to involve local businesses and try and find businesses that might have a bit of synergy with racing or the local area. For example, we're based here at Ballarat. There's plenty of days where there's nothing doing apart from the racing, and they do a very good job. They have ladies' days and things like that, and Ballarat Cup Day is fantastic here. But I think it'd be quite interesting to bring in local businesses and create a space in the grandstand where they can maybe showcase what they do, and it'll bring people in. And there'll be plenty of people here who won't be interested in racing at all and won't be watching the sport at all, and I'm sure people will complain about that. But I think for every 1,000 people you can get in for another reason, you might get 10 or 20 people who convert and actually watch the sport and enjoy it and have a bet. And I think it'll just bring more people in. It'll create a bit of diversity in the race day experience. And I think innovative, forward-thinking, experimental race clubs can really help in that regard.
Yeah, and I think a great point that you made about children going to the races. I believe it's free for kids to go to the races. It's usually costs money for parents to take their kids to the cinemas or all these things. So in some respects, horse racing actually competes against other social activities as opposed to competing against other sports, because it's so unique in the fact that when you go to a race day, for example, I watch my horse run or I watch a horse race, I then have a half-hour period where I can talk to my mates, I can do whatever I like, can run around, that type of thing. Whereas if you go to a football match or a soccer match or any other sporting match, you watch the match, and then when the match is done, that's the end of the conversing. And essentially it's a social aspect of horse racing days which attracts people, but it could attract a lot more. I know my nephew is 2 at the moment, and he actually came to Burren Beat race day where Mitch got up in the cup. And he was there, and like, he loves the horses and he's 2. And, there's nothing that says that the interest has to become something that's a betting avenue. There's so many avenues in the horse racing industry, which sometimes it is focused on that, I believe. Mitch, just on that, so things like the picnic races, so the Burren Beat Cup, for example, is packed and it's a great day every year. Why is it that days like that get so many people, but it's the access is really there for people to go and do that at any race day, but they don't choose to do it? Is it promotion? What is it that brings people into the picnic race days and they don't go regularly and create that atmosphere at every day?
Yeah, so race Meaning like Burrumbeet, it's obviously routine. It's the same day every year. Once people go there once, they usually keep coming back. It's sort of a good atmosphere under the trees there. It's usually good weather in summer, and and even sort of you're right on top of the horses there. But Matt sort of mentioned, like when I was growing up, I'd be at the thoroughbred races, but also the harness races, and going to New Zealand on a Saturday night, there was such a buzz and an atmosphere around the racetrack, and I think that we lack that now. Now, whether that be because everyone can sit at home and have the similar experience at home watching it on the TV, or whether that be because the expense, is too high, I'm not sure. There's little to no reward, in my opinion, to going to a race day other than, to see your horse race, that you don't get that buzz like you go to a footy match and the crowd's involved, and it's a real good experience. So I think we need to bring that back. How we go about that, I'm not sure. But I think unlike mainstream sport, whether it be, tennis or football or cricket, for instance, I think the wider public have a great understanding of those sports and how they operate, whose son is who or whose daughter is who playing. And, we focus mainly on the punts. And I think if we can sort of bring about the story about every horse, also educate people on the different goings on of the race meeting, whether that be the way a track's racing or the way the wind is advantaging different runners, or even the breeding side of it. It's such an interesting thing, but we don't tell that story enough. We don't tell the story enough of how the horse got to the races and the things that it might have encountered along the way. So I think there's some other avenues to make it more interesting for people rather than just the barrier the horse has drawn, the weight it's carrying, and its past performances. I think there's a lot more of a story there to tell, and I think that might be one way that we can get more people involved in the industry.
Yeah, I think the story is really, really important. I think if you look at, say, Manchester United, for example, in football, you have a child is born into a family that potentially follows that team, and then that's the same in all sports, and generally that then creates a generational following. And horse racing, probably there's been a lot of talk around the younger generation coming to the races, and even when I had my meeting with racing.com, they brought that up, that it's great to see somebody trying to get more younger people to the races. But I actually think it's a great thing for younger people, but it's the media and the social media is controlled a lot by the bookmaking industry, which is vital to the industry. We all understand that. But like Matt mentioned earlier with bringing kids to the races, I think that way, if they enjoy it, they'll get more involved. Something that happens in my sport a lot. So with futsal, we actually go out to the schools and we go into the schools and we do a lot of clinics and things like that, which with horse racing is quite difficult to do. But maybe there's an opportunity to get schools, especially in, I think you guys are both in Ballarat. I'm not sure how it would work for Troy in Flemington, but there's a really easy option for kids to go out to the stables and that type of thing, and maybe that could spike their interest. Troy, back to you. Another thing I thought of, I was watching a Jordan documentary, and there's nothing at all on horses like that. If you go to Netflix and anything like that, there's nothing that would get people to follow a horse racing documentary other than, sort of movies like Ride Like a Girl and those types of things. But an actual documentary, which is similar to you follow a trainer or you follow a series of trainers, would be quite interesting. Is that something that's ever been discussed in the horse industry?
A couple of things have been discussed, Corey, and we don't have the mainstream following as such as the NBA does. I think we probably need to increase that, but it'd be a fantastic thing to watch and obviously be involved with. But the back end of things and for people to see what actually goes on in the mornings and that sort of stuff, I reckon it'd be a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a bit of a plea for us out there. So if there's anyone watching on that has those sorts of expertise or the contacts, then get in contact. We'd love to start one. I'm happy to help do that. I have no idea how to film or create a documentary, but be happy to help. try and make
One
it
other
work.
thing, Corey, I wanted to mention, we were talking about getting the youth to the races. I think it's imperative. You look at New Zealand. Not a lot of people would know this, but there was a period in time where the Kiwis wouldn't allow children to go to the races. I can't give you the exact years, but I know a good friend of mine was. He's 50 now, and when he was growing up, if he wasn't involved, he wasn't allowed to go. So you've basically kiboshed a whole generation from going to the races early. So they've come through and just have no interest in horse racing whatsoever. And you can see basically how bad New Zealand's going at the moment. I just wonder whether there's any correlation between them.
Yeah. And yes, the other thing that I noticed, the Auckland Turf Club actually has so speaking of New Zealand, Denny Deegan had said that the Auckland Turf Club has a disco after races, which people stay at. So events like that obviously help race days. So, you're not just going for the races, you're going to an event. So I think people love to go to an event, and the Melbourne Cup is an event. All of the little country cups for that community, it's an event. So if we can try and create events where there's sport involved once you get there, then I think we'd get a lot more. As you can see there, the poll's up, guys. So just seeing what a lot of people are saying, more events to attract kids, which I'm all for. I think if you get kids there at a young age, they'll be interested in horses. I wish I found it earlier, to be honest. I've loved it since I've been involved, and I'm sure if you get most trainers that generally say that they got involved in that part of the business because of their parents, which all three of you have readily stated. We'll just finish that poll there. So I'll share the results. So the winner was lower cost for entry fees, racing club tours, which is we hadn't spoken about. Education on track was the winner. So Matt, back to yourself there. Would having the race clubs themselves educate people as they come in, not just about how to place a bet, but actually what type of races they are, what to look for on the days of races? Would that be? That's obviously a popular answer. So.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. In fact, Rebecca's asked earlier as well about whether we know as trainers, whether we know about some of the events that some of the race clubs do, and I'm sure they're doing lots of things that we don't know about, and there's no reason really for us to know about it because I suppose we're not the target. It's the more the general race going public. But I think there's certainly initiatives I have seen. I can't remember right now whether it's in the UK or here, but they used to have people walking around with big boards and a sign with a question mark on it, and anyone who had a question about how to put a bet on or about a horse or any part of the race day experience could ask that person walking around. I think that's a great initiative, and it's certainly all about educating. But I think just going back to an earlier question, which I forgot to answer, but talking about racing as being potentially seen as elite, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that, and I know it's our fault for giving that perception probably, but I think I challenge you to find another sport that's as good a leveler, if you like, and you get as good a mix of society. You get such a broad range from the average race day goer who's a sort of $5 punter to the Arab, the wealthy racehorse owner who owns an oil well in Saudi Arabia. You get that broadness of people that's there, and it's not really about just the exclusive people. There is a huge depth, I think, more than you'd get anywhere else. So it really is a sport that's open to everyone, and we need to try and make sure we drive that image, put that image across.
Yeah, and I think that's my background, as I keep alluding to, is in football, and I spent the best part of 25 years getting the contacts to be able to go and watch the top coaches and the top managers in world football at their training venues. But I've been involved in horse racing for 1 year, and already I'm able to go and do that. So as an owner, you basically, the way I would describe it is you're supporting your football team. So you pay your membership, which is your small share in a horse. You pay your membership, but the difference is you may get a return. Whereas if you pay for a football membership, you're going to the matches and that's it. In horse racing, you can go to the coach essentially and have dialogue with him. Whereas as a football fan, you don't have any dialogue or with the players or the coach. So I guess like horse racing is unique in that situation, like you said, and it's really is for everyone. So I'm going to move on to the next section now. So ownership experience, which is a similar topic, but I guess it's slightly just because it's all about putting in ownership and then having your day at the races. So one question here from Trevor Tippett was, would the trainers be up for having a competition where you could win the opportunity to be an owner for the day? So no prize money as such, but it's a competition run by, so I'll give this one to you, Mitch. It's a competition, so you hold a competition, somebody wins that competition, they get to be owner of one of your horses and do all of the things that an owner would do for that day, but obviously with no prize money. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, it's obviously an idea that's sort of happened pretty irregularly in the past. Like it has happened before. I'm not sure of the success of it. I'd be more than happy to do it. You'd have to get Race Victoria on board and make sure they can give out those passes and that sort of stuff. But it's certainly something that I'd be happy to do, to just give people sort of what the experience is. And, you know, if we could do that a week or two out, give them the lead up updates going into the race, and obviously the race day experience, I think it'd be a good promotional tool for our industry.
Yeah, and Troy, obviously with ownership, a lot of people have come in with answers where basically they want to get as close to the trainer as they possibly can. That's a juggling act for you guys as trainers, because firstly you need to train the horse, and then also you need to make sure that your owners are happy. How has the current climate made that difficult, and what sort of things have you done to try and make sure that your owners are still getting the same experience, or at least a good experience with the restrictions?
Communication is key. We're very lucky. I've got a young lady that works for us, and she's been going to the races and basically filming a hell of a lot of what goes on. So saddling up, pre-parade, just different parts of the race day, and then we've been sending that out straight after the race, which people have, it's very different. Some of my bigger owners couldn't care less if they saw that or not. They'd prefer a phone call from me, but some of our 2.5% owners love it, and some of our 50% owners love it. So everyone takes things differently, but it's great to be able to give them something like that, to be able to give back and still give them that little bit of experience. The ownership for the day is a fantastic idea, and it has been done many times. And I can tell you now that there wouldn't be too many trainers that would say no to it. I actually picked up a really good owner from doing it. It was about 3 years ago, and it was one of the bigger days, and they came along and enjoyed the day. We ran third, I think, with that actual horse, but the couple that came in for the owner for the day have gone on, and they own 7 and 8 horses with us now. So it's a really good experience. Again, it's just one of those things that needs to be organised, but it is a really good idea.
Yeah, and I think all three of you are known as being really good with your owners. I've got a message here from Luke Barker. Matt, he's actually put this in his homework, so he hasn't actually said anything about what you can improve. He says, I love going to the stable and watching the horses work in Ballarat. That's thanks to Matt's happy, welcoming attitude and the knowledge that he is prepared to share. I rarely bet on a Cumani horse. So building on from what Troy said, what is it that, one, obviously that's nice to hear from your owners, but you must also have difficult owners also. So what is it that, how do you balance training and looking after the owners? That must be a continuous juggling act.
Yeah, it's thanks for this question. It's a tricky one. Yeah, look, it's like any business, I suppose. Without owners, we can't do this. They're the lifeblood, and it's really important that we look after our owners. And I think it's an easy trap to fall into, that you're constantly looking for new clients, and you maybe perhaps neglect your current ones. But I think and as Troy was saying, you've got to really know your owners as well and know what they want, because there's no point sending fun, fancy videos to your big owner breeders that really aren't interested in that. They just want to get their their filly to win a group race, and that's all that matters to them. And they want to know a call and have the information direct from you. And then there are owners that like seeing the bigger picture, the overall, what goes into training horses and what goes into preparing one for the races. So you've really got to know your clients. But I think that's the key, is trying to understand and develop a relationship, be open and transparent, be always available. We can't always, we might have 600 owners on our books at varying sizes. So, we can't always take all the calls at all times. But, be always there to call them back if possible, or answer an email. And we've got a team in the office. I'm more than happy for anyone to talk to them as well. And I'm sure, all trainers have different ways of approaching it, but, and I think from an owner's point of view, it's about finding a trainer that you get on with. And I think it's very easy to think, well, that trainer's got the most wins and therefore he must be the best trainer. But you might go there and you might not enjoy the experience. So you might go to another trainer and find someone, I think, who you get on with and who you understand and who you trust, and then trust in that trainer to give your horse the best chance of doing its best at the races.
Yeah, something Simon Vivian said on the first episode was that when somebody's coming into the industry, that it's a good thing to invest in the person and not just invest in the horse. So invest in people, people in the industry. So Mitch, over to you. Obviously, there's a lot of stable visits and that type of frequent. Is that and do you find that gives benefits to trainers, having your owners come and see how you do your work and being able to have that dialogue with them?
Sorry, I just missed the first part of that question there, Corey.
Stable visits. So a few people have said that they'd love to have more stable visits and functions within their basically what they see as their club, which is, they sign up for Mitch Freedman Racing, they buy an ownership in one of your horses, they see that as their club. How much does that help you getting to know your owners and chatting to them at the races, seeing them at your stables, that type of thing?
Yeah, look, we hold the one main open day throughout the year. That's on our Ballarat Cup Day, and show off the stable and the staff and the horses. So that's the main day. Obviously, we have informal stable visits from a number of different owners throughout the year, outside of the restrictions at the moment. So that's obviously something they enjoy doing. As you said, it's sort of part of a club, and they want to come and be involved in that. So we're open to that, and it's probably something that I've realised as I've got going along a bit more as a trainer. You're selling an experience, and it's a hobby for a lot of people out there, especially the smaller share owners, and it's definitely a need to entertain them. And if they don't like their experience, it's easy to go and buy a boat or go for a holiday. So that's something that I've sort of had to bring up to speed, and we continue to work on at the moment. Yeah,
and I guess different to other sports. So we talked about the advantages of horse racing, but the disadvantages are, and this is for yourself, Troy, other sports you see, they get behind a club. So we talked about the exact same thing being an advantage for horse racing. They get behind a club. They might have flags of that team. They might have scarves of that team. They may have merchandise for that team. It's probably not, you don't see, 1,000 people come to Melbourne Cup Day wearing Team Corstens gear, for example, Malua Racing. It's not something that is, other than Winx, when the merchandise became such a big thing, it's not something that's regularly done. Is there any way to replicate, I guess, that last minute goal as a team in a cup final, or the goal on the siren in the AFL Grand Final, other than the actual race? Is there a way to bring people in as a team? What are your thoughts on that?
No, not really. I don't think there is, because so many owners nowadays diversify and have shares in horses with so many different trainers. So who do they go for? Are they on, Team Troy, Matt and Mitch, or are they on Team Hayes? Or so they're just, honestly, like I guarantee, I don't know off the top of my head, but it'd be owners that Matt, myself, and Mitch all share at the moment. They've probably got 5% in one with me, one with Matt, and maybe 4 with Mitch. So it's very hard to corral them and get them all together to go for the one trainer or the one stable. So I think it's a good idea in theory, but I'm not sure that we could ever pull it off.
And that leads me to my next question. Is there events that are between different stables? So, for example, you mentioned yourself, Mitch and Matt would have similar owners. Is there many events which are held for multiple stables? So, for example, in Ballarat, I know that essentially within a 1 kilometre radius, there's maybe 7, 8 different trainers and stables which could potentially hold joint events. Is that something that's happened in the past regularly, or is it sort of an ad hoc thing?
No, there used to be, at Flemington, there used to be a football game between stables, but that hasn't happened for several years. But other than that, nothing sort of like that really happens anymore.
Yeah, and Matt, I spoke to you about this earlier, and Mitch is just, I'm going to pick on Mitch here. He has to say yes whether he likes it or not. The first annual Ballarat stable soccer match between, I'd say, Matt Cumani's team and Mitch Freedman's team at Sebas Soccer Ground, which I'll get the ground for free. You guys just need to get a team each, and we'll get that going as a regular event. What do you say, Matt and Mitch?
Well, I guess if we're in Australia, we better play Aussie rules and not soccer. But look, I mean, yeah, things like that are great. Obviously, the cricket match has a great following. The jockeys versus sort of the celebrities one, but it's a little bit hard to hold sort of dual open days or open days with a number of stables, because at the end of the day, you're a business competing against each other. I know that we want plenty of owners and participants in the industry, but if you own a restaurant, you don't sort of share your clients, have open slather. It's a little bit tricky, and I can understand the desire to see a number of different stables, and I suppose when you do have those owners that share stables, they get the opportunity to do that, but it is just a little bit of a tricky one in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to wrap up, I've obviously put the poll up there, but just to wrap up, a trainer ran a comp on Facebook free to win some shares last year, and you've just answered one of the other questions there as well, I believe. So thanks for that, guys. We'll just move on again. So the winner of that, more detailed info about your horse. I think every owner wants communication, and you all three of you alluded to that, that the better communicators generally are the trainers that people are happy with, and then results on the track is the best form of communication possible. So I'll end that poll there, share the results with everyone. Just move on now. So to training towards the race day, a lot of questions on this. So I'll go back to yourself, Matt. How do you choose what race a horse is going to go into? So setting a horse for a race or mapping out a plan for that horse, what goes into that?
Well, for me, it's I suppose slightly different to Mitch and Troy in that I'm relatively new to Australian racing. So for me, I'm still learning a lot about the calendar. So it's a slightly more laborious process. I have to really go through the calendar and see when the races are. But essentially, if you've got a good horse or a horse you're certainly excited about, you might look 6, even 12 months ahead and really start working back from there. If you've got a horse that you just, is maybe a 15-start maiden and you're just trying to win a race, you sort of go a little bit week to week, and until that horse starts to improve, then you might start planning further ahead. But you're kind of guided by the calendar a little bit. It's not like there's 1,000 races to pick from. Your horse will run over, or you might want it to run over a certain distance. It will be at a certain grade, whether it's a maiden or it might have a benchmark rating, and that will sort of narrow down or filter down, if you like, the races available to your horse. And so you might only have 2 or 3 options. Sometimes you're really stuck for options. You've got to try and look at another state. It's possibly a slightly different calendar to the one I grew up with in the UK, where you had a lot more opportunity to be a bit inventive, I think. And you know, there were some horses that you really had to work out if they qualified for some races, and there were certain conditions and you know, races, for example, that were dependent on what the stallion of your horse stands for. And so I found that, you know, it's quite interesting, that approach. It certainly took a lot more time to work out where your horses might go, but it also meant that you could find opportunities. Whereas I think the Australian calendar sometimes guides you a bit too much. You know, you don't really have opportunities about just trying to get lucky with the horse at being ready at the right time and when the weather's at the right spot. And then the calendar sort of takes you by the hand and forces you to run in certain races. And then you then just decide based on how that horse is running and if it's winning or not, as to whether you go up in grade or up in distance or down in distance and down in grade.
Yeah. And Mitch, a few questions have come in on how do you know when a horse needs to be spelled, when a horse needs to be pushed harder, or what indicators are there to tell whether a horse is responding to the training? People, like you often hear trainers say, you know, it's got to the trial and it needs to be tipped back out again for its education. What indicators are there as a trainer? What decides whether they go to the races, and why is it that in Australia we do spell our horses a lot more than overseas? You're on mute, Mitch.
Sorry, you got me there now?
Yeah, got you now. Yeah.
The last part of the question is obviously probably one Matt might be able to answer a bit better with spelling and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I've worked a little bit of time over in Europe and seen the way they do it, and they obviously keep the horses in stable for longer. Sometimes they stay in light work, and obviously we've got the option to turn them out and spell them, and that's what we choose to do a lot of the time. But the reasons why we spell them, you know, immaturity, or they've gone over the top, you know, we're always looking for their attitude towards the work. Yeah, change or staying the same. You know, whether the horse is fresh, it might need more work, or whether the horse is just starting to become a bit revved up by the work. It sort of can be another reason to spell them. You know, they go off their feed, or you know, their legs start to get a bit warm and they're just not handling the workload. So there's some reasons to spell them. And I guess we're just monitoring that all the time. And I suppose that, you know, you don't do an apprenticeship as such, but when you're learning your craft and learning on the job, they're the things and the indicators that you're looking for and really keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, and Troy, one for you. There's a question here. Is there a specific physical trait of a horse which makes it prefer light ground or heavy ground? Is there a specific trait, or is that something that just is a horse by horse case based on experience?
Yeah, 100%. It's a horse by horse case, and we were actually talking about it in the box the other day. That I was with David Hayes and Tony McAvoy, and we were all saying how our horses didn't like wet ground, and we didn't have a lot of luck and success in wet ground. But at Flemington, we hardly ever get heavy tracks. The tracks drain so well. Excuse me. The tracks drain so well, we don't get a chance to really try our horses on them. So I'm not sure whether that's an indicator, whether the more they go on them, the more they get used to them, and the more they like them, and the better they get through them. But it's very, very hard to know. And even I've trialled horses before, and you can trial them on a slow 7 or a heavy 8. And while you've got them on the bridle, they'll be going good. But it's until they're under that complete race pressure that you know whether they handle it or not. Some do, some don't. You can't tell until you test them.
Yeah, and building on Troy, with one of the participants has written in here that in a traditional pre-season, in say football, which he's talking about here, you know, you wouldn't want to. Why would you wouldn't bring a fat player back to then start getting ready for the next season and starting from scratch? You want them to go to the off season and keep a level of fitness. Obviously with horses, they go out, they go to the paddock, and in some cases they do get a little bit bigger, and then they come back, and then you put them into their next prep. What's the reason there, and does that, like, how does that their injury risk as opposed to a human athlete, which obviously increases their risk if they did that?
It's a very different analogy because when you've got a human that's a footballer, they get to a certain level and they never get below it, and it's a really good point. But what you've got to understand is those footballers are usually fully grown, fully developed, and fully matured, whereas we're working with the equivalents of 8-year-old and 10-year-old kids. So it's a matter of developing them, letting them grow, letting them strengthen before we can apply more pressure. So it's not just a matter of being able to keep them in, keep them going, keeping that pressure on, because they all grow differently. And recent research says that, the optimum spell for a young horse is 8 weeks. So anything really less than that is you're doing it a disservice. But we're not really afforded that, and we've got to get them in a lot quicker than that. But I know exactly where the person's coming from, and it's a great question and great in theory, and you can do it a hell of a lot when they're older. I think we can keep them up, keep them going, and we try and do that all the time. We send them to the beach or we'll send them to the farm, just try and do something different. But younger horses definitely, in my opinion, need a break. I know Matt will be able to talk better on it than I can, why they do it so differently in England. But
I think,
over here, I think they really need a break.
I think your answer with it being the equivalent to 8-year-old or 9-year-old kids is really important, because at an elite level of sport, ball sports for kids that age, it's very similar in terms of you need to have different ideas. It can't be all tactics based. It can't be all performance based at that level. And there's different ages that you go into different levels of training. And I think sometimes we forget that these horses are kids. So I think that's probably answered that question really well. Matt, just touching on the differences overseas, why is it a little bit different?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and one I'm always asked, and don't really have the answer as to why it's happened like that. I think probably cost has come into it a fair bit here. It's quite nice to give the owner a break as well as the horses. The training fees are quite high, and if you can go 3 months of the year with them out in the paddock and saving a little bit on that, when in the UK the horse would just be kept in the stable ticking over and charging, costing a lot. I think it probably does help the owners. But in the UK, we might have a colt come in as a 2-year-old or as a late yearling, and it might stay in the stable until it's 5 years old and never leave. Which is quite alien, I think, to Australian way. But I think it does actually work quite well, because the English calendar was based on the seasons. Before we had synthetic racing, the flat racing on the turf would go from sort of March to November, and then you'd have a period over Christmas that there was no racing. So horses would just be kept ticking over. We used to, thinking of my father's stable, we used to cut them right back to just trotting only during the winter. And so they'd go out and do 20 minutes, half an hour of trotting, and then go back to the stable. And that's what they'd do throughout the winter. And I think, but more recently, we've been doing a bit more varied things. So like light canters, and just keep them ticking over. I think what's important for a horse is to basically go a period without galloping. I think that's the key. I really question at this stage, how useful sitting in a cold, wet paddock over the winter is for a horse, and they just stop dead and don't do very little exercise. I think there must be all sorts of muscle atrophy all over them, and I think it's probably better if we can work towards a point where you can keep horses doing a little bit of something. And Troy was talking about it, going to the beach, going to the farm, doing a little bit of cross training, if you like, a bit of swimming or water walking or venting or jumping, a little bit of something different that maybe uses different parts of the body, gives the surfaces of their joints a bit of relief, which is what takes the real hard pounding when they're galloping. And if they can go a period without that intense work, I think that does them just as much good as just sitting in paddock. But often your horses need a break, as in you're not just spelling them because they're sort of slightly going off their feed. They need a proper 3-month break because they've actually got an injury. And there, in those instances, your hand is forced. You actually, you've got to give them a long period off. So there are, and obviously in the UK we do that still. You know, you have plenty of horses that would at some point have an injury in their career and would go out. But as for why there's that dramatic difference, why Australia didn't follow the English model when racing started here and not have horses spell, I don't know. It's a strange one. There's no answer to, and I don't think one way is necessarily better than the other. But it's certainly interesting comparing the two and knowing what you can do with a horse and knowing what they need in terms of breaks and how long they can keep racing.
Yep. And Mitch, I'll give you a bit of a loaded question now. So just up on the screen, the routine for a race day. Obviously, you're training. Do you get nervous? Processes and reading the horse's behaviour and your team. So basically, getting ready for a race day. What's it really involve as a trainer? So how does your normal race day routine look?
So similar to every other morning, we go in for track work and whatnot. Obviously, the horses that are racing, temperatures are checked. We do a trot up. You know, if there's any concerns going into the race, there's certainly a blood taken and just assess that as well. In terms of nerves, I don't get too nervous before a race meeting now. When I started, I probably was, or every now and again you might, you know, whether it be an expensive yearling going for its first start or a new owner or a big race, you know, maybe a little bit, but not too much. The horses as such, we're obviously, once again, we're just looking for changes in attitude or changes in their demeanour on race day. And assessing that throughout their campaign. So I guess that's an answer to that question.
Yeah, yep. And I'll try and wrap this subject up here, Troy. The final one is jockey selection. What's the process? And what's the process from start to finish of selecting a jockey and getting the right one?
It's really good at the moment because of COVID, they haven't been able to travel to all the carnivals. So you find at the moment that basically every jockey wants to come and ride work for you. So it's quite rare, but obviously the bigger stable that you are, the better jockeys that want to come and ride work for you. And you've just got to be a little bit careful because some owners like different jockeys. Some trainers get on well with different jockeys. I'm finding at the moment we're having quite a lot of luck with John Allen. So he rides quite a bit of work for me as well. Comes down on every Friday, and I'm finding that everything I put him on, he's going quite well on. And I don't know, we just seem to mix. So I think that I work that way, and whoever helps us, I try and help. But sometimes you've got to pander to owners as well. They're paying the bills, so if they've got a large share and they have a preference for a jockey, I'll listen and advise, and we'll go from there. You've got to work together and see what you can do.
Yeah, and just on to questions. So I'll try and flick through these as quick as we can. So Matt, there's just a little bit about when a horse is parading in a ring at the races. So Mitch touched on that last week with his opinions, but how would you like to see more education surrounding that for the industry? I know that confirmation is something that I'd like to do a webinar on, but it is quite difficult because you really need to see the horse moving and have somebody there showing you. What are your thoughts on that in terms of education for the wider public?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. I mean, I think the racing.com and the broadcasters do a great job on that. They always have a view from the paddock, and people giving quite good insights into what they're looking for in a horse. But it'd be a good idea to have it maybe on the big days, have someone standing by the ring again with a big sign saying "Ask me a question." I think that's a nice way to give anyone a chance to ask a question, see what they look for. Personally, I like to see a nice relaxed horse, one that looks good in the coat, and one that looks sort of focused and alert, but not over worried and not sweating, not too hairy. But it's a great level of this game because you can have your ideas and you have what you look for, and then the complete opposite type of horse will come out and win. I think you've got to hang your hat on something, as my old man always says. You've got to hang your hat on something with horses, whether you're buying them, training them, selecting them in the parade ring. I think you've just got to identify a few key markers that you like to see in a racehorse and stick with it.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So good answer again. We're going to move through now, guys. So a few more questions there. Tried horses, Mitch. I know Matt. Yeah, actually, I'll stay with you, Matt, for this one. I know that you've got a few tried horses in your stable. So what attracts you to tried horses? I know that we've done a lot of education on going to the sales on the webinars, but I had a question here from one of our participants asking whether you would look at a tried horse and for what reasons.
Yeah, I think tried horses are interesting. Although you've got to be very careful. I think if you go into it a little bit too arrogant, thinking that you can certainly improve that horse with another trainer, I think you're going to burn your fingers, because there's nothing like form to really give you a good picture of a horse. And if you're trying to buy a horse that's had 30 starts off another trainer, I think it's highly unlikely that you're going to be able to improve it. You might be able to tweak a few things there. You might be able to get a little bit of improvement, maybe a bit more consistency by changing a few things. But I think it's highly unlikely you're going to suddenly change it into a Group 1 horse. Although that has happened. I mean, there are horses like, obviously Takeover Target is one that really comes to mind. And it can happen, but I think it's a bit like winning the lottery, or, because you've got to find a horse not only that has perhaps been a little bit immature, maybe in its early days with a previous trainer. Perhaps that trainer's missed something, but you've got to end up finding the horse that you actually gel with, and that somehow it suits your training. I think the chance of that happening are so small, but it's part of the fun of the game. You've got to back yourself a little bit. And if you see a horse that you think's been run over the wrong distance, you see something in the pedigree that you think might give you a different insight, or you see him at the races and you think you can change its character, then it's worth giving it a go. But it's also a very tricky, part of the game, because you're buying a horse that's well tried, well used, that might have an injury, and you know very little about it. But it's a lot of fun trying it.
Great answer. And Mitch, just on a couple of things going on in your stable, I noted that and I actually asked you about the Kermadec colt, which you bought lot 584 at the English Classic sale. So I had a question from one of our participants surrounding, why do you sometimes see horses that are bought at the sales but not then advertised or not then available to buy shares in? And I thought that was a great one to maybe bring up with yourself. It was out of Asina, a German mare, and you picked it up for 10,000, which seemed like a bit of a bargain. If you could expand on why that one wasn't available for the public.
Yeah, so that horse in particular was a horse I'd sort of done most of the sales there at Classic Sale. I looked at most of the horses, and it's just a staying sort of horse that I quite liked, and cheap horse, passing in the ring, and we bought it after the sale, but had a significant X-ray issue. It had a fracture to a hind pastern as a young horse. It was all healed, and the vet's advice was that it probably wouldn't cause an issue, but if it did, there wasn't much they could do for that horse. So I just bought that with taking that risk myself, and probably going to race it as a sort of a staff horse for the staff that are still there once it's up and going from when I bought it. So that's something I do there, that I'm going to do there, and that's why we didn't offer it to the public, because I don't really want to pass on that risk to other people. The other reasons why a horse might not be offered is, sometimes we go to the sales and we get very lucky and we have an owner to buy a horse for, which makes our job a lot easier, and you don't advertise that to the public. Sometimes I buy a horse or two per year that we can try and on-sell to Asia or something like that, and it's just a bit of another avenue for business for us.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next subject, actually. So if you're lucky enough, Troy, that a bunch of owners would like to go into a horse and buy you one to train, then this is the opportunity we mentioned. You've offered for people and followers of the webinar that you would go to the sales and select a horse for us. If you could touch slightly on that, pretty exciting opportunity to go to the sales with a trainer, see everything that we've been asking about, and for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, well, hopefully by the time the sales come around, a lot of the restrictions are lifted and everybody can get down there themselves, because it's a really good experience. We'll do a lot of the groundwork, so you don't have to go and look at all the horses yourselves, but we'll probably pick out 15 or 20 that we'll have a really good look at and just show to everybody. They might even have a good vote on which ones we decide, which one we want to decide we want to go for. Put them in a list and then go from there, Corey.
Yeah, and that, I mean, when I spoke to you, something that really stood out to me was the fact that you were happy for people to come in. I believe it's 1% each, but essentially, if we got 100 people doing that, then perfect for you. There's a horse sold, but you are also happy to take that risk and buy into it yourself if need be, which obviously means that you can keep it. It can be pretty standardized for everyone, and they can go in whether we have 13 people or whether we have 100 people. So, which is pretty exciting. I know that I'm pretty excited by that, and a few of our participants are pretty excited about that. So that's a good opportunity, and we'll see Simon there with his hammer. So that will be good as well. We'll move on from that one. So if anyone's interested in that, then feel free to get in contact. Just touching on that though, Matt, as well, I noticed I've been doing a bit of research on your page, and you do have a huge stable now, considering how quickly it's grown from strength to strength. You're getting lots of winners on the track. Only positive feedback I've heard from your training so far, and I actually originally you weren't on the panel, and I had lots of my participants asking me to get in contact, and when I did, everything they said was true. You've been really good to deal with. But you've got 3 on there at the moment. I noticed one of them was the full brother to Ring a Ding Ding. So firstly, if you wanted to spruik that one, but even tell us what else is happening in your stable, what to keep an eye on the track, or what to keep an eye on in the future on the track.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Ring a Ding Ding's the brother Ring a Ding Ding's actually an interesting one. He's not, fun enough, a horse that I selected myself, but an owner came to me and said he wants to buy it, and could I help him sell it? And obviously, with a pedigree like that, he's a very exciting horse for the stable. He's actually in the stable at the moment. He's probably a slightly more backward type than I would have assumed of him, because I didn't see him as a yearling at the sales. But I think he's got, even though it's very early days, it's hard to tell, but I think he's got a good engine. He's got, for a big gangly horse, he's got a lot of balance and a lot of poise. So I think he'll have a short prep this time around and then go out for a relatively long break, and we'll go very patient on him and hope that he can emulate, the promise that Ring a Ding Ding showed. I know he's now gone stud, but I think his brother could come through and hopefully be a bigger, better version of him. But we got some nice horses still for sale. We bought a lovely So You Think filly at the English Premier sale. So You Think's obviously doing a huge job as a young stallion. Won the Derby this year, and she's a really nice type with a really good family. So she's an exciting sort. I actually just bought a brother to a mare that I've got racing. This will probably affect her price next time, maybe, but a horse called Miltida that should have won last start and was just pipped on the line, unfortunately. But I really like her and her family. The mare's called Special Mission, and has bred Redouble, the horse of Bjorn Baker's, and I bought this horse off the owner just the other day. So that's one that'll be coming up on the website soon, and I think could have huge potential. Otherwise, we'll be going to the Vobis sale and trying to find a couple of Victorian breds to try and win the showdown with next year.
Well, I'm sure we can make another deal with you, Matt and Mitch, while we're making deals to go to the sale. So, Mitch, I was going to ask you about a different horse, but Jared Silver's actually posted here saying he's almost in need of another yearling, and he wanted you to give your best sales pitch on Presence, Daloon, Who's My Daddy. But what other horses have you got that we should look out for on the track in your stable?
Yeah, obviously the yearlings are just starting to come in and out of our system at the moment. And obviously the 2-year-olds are sort of not far off, hitting the track. So in my stable, I've syndicated a lot of the yearlings we've bought already, but there's still a few available. The Hughes My Daddy, Presence, Daloon, filly, my best sales pitch is getting quick because she's just about done. You know, she's been the one that's probably been moving the best over these sort of trying times to sell horses. She's been in and out spelling now. Really nice filly with a very correct action, and you know, she just did everything right in her first prep. But I really like a filly that I bought down in Tassie by Territories, who's a bit of an unknown stallion here, and just happened to run into a few of them when I was doing on-farm inspections for Melbourne Premier, and I thought they were really good types, and happened to pick her up down in Tassie, and she's in the stables at the moment, and she's just showing a really forward attitude. She's a great physical specimen, and got quite a nice pedigree on her without it being riddled with black type. So she's one that I'm sort of pushing pretty hard at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess what's coming up, as you can see on our screen there, guys, I've got the poll at the moment. What I wanted to ask Troy, we spoke a little bit about pin hooking. So firstly, what are the different types of pin hooking? And I guess the main one that you specialize in is buying yearlings and then getting them ready to run sales. What's the process and what goes into training a yearling towards a ready to run? Sorry, at the moment the Tattersalls breeze ups are on in the UK, so it's sort of prevalent in the questioning. So I thought it was a good time to ask.
Yeah, it's something that I've done for probably 4 or 5 years now that I really enjoy. Also like trading quite a few horses. So I'll keep a large chunk of horses, yearlings that I buy, and try and sell them on for an inflated price. Doesn't always go to plan, but sometimes it can pay off quite nicely. Basically, you've got to look for. I do it a little bit differently because I'll look for a yearling to pin hook as a ready to run horse, but I'll make sure that I buy a horse that I'm happy to train. So if we get stuck and we can't ready to run for whatever reason, and there are several, I'll make sure that we've got a horse that I think's got a future and that we can turn into a racehorse. So I'm a little bit lucky that we can do that as we go move ahead. But there's no difference in buying a ready to runner than there is a normal horse, other than you probably want something that's basically sprint based, but not always. You can get those middle distance horses that do really well, and obviously it's got to be a colt. So you can't buy fillies for a ready to run because it doesn't work. I've tried it.
Yeah, and why is that? I guess to expand on it.
The majority of the market is for Asia, and Asia just doesn't buy female horses.
Yeah, and I guess, Matt, just building on, obviously we're going to the sales with Troy, but an idea just popped in my head there when you said you were going to go as well. If we get heaps and heaps of people looking to buy in for their 1%, we get more than 100. The next 100 comes to you. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm sure. I think what's a good thing, what people often don't know about, is that they can come to the sale. It's open to anyone, and I think a lot of trainers are very happy to sit down and have a coffee in between looking, and perhaps, if people are really interested, take them around and have a look at a horse. And it's a great opportunity to find out what trainers actually are looking for when they buy horses. And we're all a bit different. We all like different things. And I think the sales is actually a great day out and a great experience. And I think it's worth coming to the upcoming Rover sale.
The other good thing is I've never taken an owner to a sale that hasn't bought a share in a horse. So once they get there, they're basically hooked and they love it. So it's a really good way to get people into racing.
Yeah, and so I've just got the poll results up there. So for the future, so looking at where the webinar goes, obviously we're finishing up now for the 4-week series, but the webinars will continue. I've already made a few more deals on the webinar front. Kieran Maher's going to do a section there. Racing families, you'll see up on the screen. So Matt, I heard your family might be into racing and could potentially be a story on that front. So I've penciled you in, as I spoke to you about today. We've got Racing for Beginners. So up in the top right, you'll see Dean Pettit. He's going to give us 30 minutes of his time where we ask as many questions on as many subjects as we like, and he'll answer every single question he can in that 30-minute period. We've got Trainer's Corner, which Kieran will be involved with, how to stand a stallion. I've been speaking with James Price, and we're hoping to get 2 or 3 different stud farms to give us different ways of how they actually stand a stallion and what's involved in that. Interstate and overseas interviews. So some of you would have seen the interview with Jack Cantillon during the week. Wagering, which has come up a lot in the conversation, but it's probably not my passion, but I know that it is something that's very important to the industry. And the most popular pick of the future webinars was stud farm focused breeding and pedigree, which is really interesting because Kristen Manning and I have been speaking the last week about trying to do a series on that exact topic. So with her expertise in pedigree, along with getting some of the stud farms with a focus on specific stallions and delving a little bit further into them than we did with the first webinar on that. So pretty exciting times. Hopefully you've all enjoyed the webinars, and hopefully we continue to have a lot of interest in the project. So the first project obviously is with Troy, but I'd love to continue those projects on with, for example, we spoke about Matt, Mitch, and every other trainer on here, but not just the trainers, also maybe some breeding, maybe some pin hooking. There's so many options in the horse racing industry for those that want to get involved, and hopefully we can be a little bit of a segue into that. And finally, thank you to Matt. I think first time on the webinar, you've made a great impression. Thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Mitch, for the second week in a row, giving up your time. Appreciate that a lot. And being in Ballarat, hopefully we'll catch up at the races very soon.
No problems, Corey. And look, thanks for putting it on. And hopefully we've got a few more people involved in the industry via it all.
Yeah, and Troy, finally, thanks very much for your involvement. And we'll have more information on our little project that's going ahead after this for the participants. But thanks very much for coming on the webinars and also your initial help in getting the webinars off the ground.
Oh, and you know what? It's a great effort by you, and it's great. I sit here and watch the participants and how many people have logged on. And obviously you can't see it, but it's great to know that there are people out there that are interested. And I think you've done an amazing job, mate. You need a real pat on the back, because 6 weeks ago there was nothing like this, and all of a sudden you had an idea and you've come up with it and you've really gone through with it, and you need to be commended. You've done a fantastic job.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I guess that's to wrap up. Finally, there are some ideas that I do have, and I guess it's trying to put them into 4 weeks. It's very hard to put the topics of all the racing industry into 4 weeks. So now we've finished those 4 weeks of a bit of an introduction. Now we can start to look at different things. So for example, the sale is the first one coming up, but I will be in touch with all of the panelists that we've had and trying to have little projects with them, whether it be stable visits, whether it be whatever that might be. So please reach out if you'd like to know anything. I'm happy to help you, put you in contact with all our panelists along the way. And that's it for this week's webinar. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks a lot, Corey.
Thanks.
Thank you.